Hello there, live from London. This is BBC News. India's Foreign Secretary accuses Pakistan of provocative and escalatory actions following claims by Pakistan that an Indian airbase and airfield were destroyed by missiles. It comes after Indian strikes on Pakistan as tensions rise between the two nuclear neighbours over the disputed region of Kashmir. In other news, Sir Keir Starmer is in Ukraine as calls for Russia to agree to an unconditional 30-day ceasefire intensify. Police are investigating after one of Britain's worst killers allegedly attacks a guard in one of the UK's most secure prisons. And part of a Soviet spacecraft in orbit for more than 50 years is expected to crash back to Earth. But where it'll land, nobody knows. Hello there, I'm Rich Preston. Welcome to the programme. We begin in South Asia, and Pakistan says it is retaliating after accusing India of striking 3 of its air bases overnight, including one close to the capital, Islamabad. Both countries blame each other for the violence since militants killed Indian tourists last month in Indian-administered Kashmir. Pakistan denies any involvement. Its airspace will be closed for the next 24 hours. At least 50 people have been killed since the fighting escalated on Wednesday. The G7 group of the world's top industrial nations has called for an immediate de-escalation and direct dialogue between the two countries. The Indian military gave an update on their operation at a news conference a little earlier.
In a swift and calibrated response, Indian Armed Forces carried out precision attacks only on identified military targets. These included technical infrastructure, command and control centers, radar sites and weapon storage areas. Pakistan military targets at Rafiqi, Murid, Chaklala, Rahim Yar Khan, Sukur and Chunya were engaged using air-launched precision weapons from our fighter aircraft. Radar sites at Pasroor and Sialkot Aviation Base were also targeted using precision munitions. While carrying out these responses, India ensured minimum collateral damage.
Well, let's speak now to Vikram Doraisamy, India's High Commissioner to the UK. Your Excellency, good morning. Thank you for joining us on the programme. Pakistan says India is hitting civilians. Pakistan's Information Minister says they are scooping up women and babies. Is India targeting Pakistani civilians?
Well, you know, the Pakistan Information Minister obviously operates on that great and famous principle that Goebbels himself created, which is, as long as you tell a lie often enough, there may be 1 or 2 people who believe it. This entire thing began with terrorists, not, as you described, the militants, killing 27 people who were out on a travel in Pahalgam in India. The problem is, you know, if you don't frame the question properly, you don't get the right answer. By any stretch of the imagination, anybody who asks 26 people to identify themselves on the basis of their religious identity, including the most coarse possible way that you can imagine, and then proceeds to shoot you if you have the wrong answer in the head in front of women and children, isn't a militant. That person is a terrorist.
Your Excellency,
what we have done then, just hold on, let me complete the thought. What we have done since then is to take out terrorist infrastructure. The fact that we did not hit any Pakistani military or other infrastructure of the state is acknowledged even by the Pakistanis, albeit in a left-handed way. And I think it is important for you to ask yourself the question, and certainly your viewers should ask themselves the question, what are they retaliating about? If you start retaliating to an attack on a terrorist base and you attack our military bases then, what does that make you?
Pakistan says it doesn't have any terrorists in its territory. It refutes allegations by India that it was complicit in the attacks in April, and it says India is the aggressor here by sending missiles into its territory. The line that the Pakistani information minister kept repeating to me was that Pakistan has a right to respond to this Indian aggression.
If the state of Pakistan is responding to attacks on terrorist infrastructure, then you know what Pakistan is. That is a simple fact. The fact that Pakistan has had terrorist infrastructure in its country for the last 30 plus years isn't something that I'm saying. Ask yourself where Osama bin Laden was, or where Omar Saeed Sheikh, a gentleman of British Pakistani origin, if you can call him that, was there. Where did Danny Pearl, God bless his soul, where was he taken when he went to Bahawalpur? What happened to him? All of this it's not even hiding in plain sight. It is in plain sight. Pakistan knows it. Pakistan's leaders have acknowledged it. General Musharraf acknowledged it in a joint statement with India's Prime Minister, Mr. Vajpayee, in 2004, and said that he would do all he could to stop terror from emanating from Pakistan and Pakistani-controlled territory. That is 21 years ago. Imran Khan said the same as Prime Minister, that there are at least 50 separate terrorist groups in Pakistan. Look, you don't have to ask me for this. This is records that even the BBC would probably be able to find.
We've seen several flare-ups between India and Pakistan recently, 2016, 2019, all over the disputed territory of Kashmir.
I'm sorry, let me correct that. The dispute is not about Kashmir. The dispute about Kashmir is a simple one. Pakistan occupies illegally, including by British law, by the law passed by your parliament that gave India its independence and partition, thereby creating Pakistan. Pakistan has no right to any part of the territory of Kashmir.
Well, if I may continue, Pakistan disputes that, and the territory, Your Excellency, the territory is disputed by India, Pakistan,
and we have got into fighting over terrorist strikes. There is little doubt about that. We have only responded to terror strikes.
Your Excellency, that the territory is disputed in parts between India, Pakistan, and China. If I may continue, and China as well. This is arguably the worst it's been. What the world is calling for now is de-escalation. Moving forward, how will India look to de-escalate, as has been called for by the G7, by the United States, and by China? How will India look to de-escalate this situation?
The offer is on the table, as you know. We have repeatedly said it is for Pakistan to stop trying to hit our military bases. If it hits our military bases, as we have said repeatedly, we will hit back every bit as hard, if not harder. So the option is there. And if the world really wants to do something, you have had a choice for the last 30 years. Everybody knows that this terrorist infrastructure is there. Prime Minister Blair has engaged in the past, in the 2000s, with this. President Bush has engaged in the past with this. Nothing has happened. So if you really want to do something, you have to ask yourself where all your money for aid and development goes and why Pakistan's military has 18% of the state's GDP. You have to ask yourself why the people of Pakistan continue to be immiserated with less of their GDP being spent on education and healthcare, despite all the aid that's been given. And you have to ask yourself why all of that gets spent, including on buying weapons from China and from Turkey and the United Kingdom.
Well, you mentioned China there. It's thought around 80% of Pakistan's weapons come from China. There are also links between Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, as you mentioned. Are you concerned, Your Excellency, that India is somewhat isolated on the international stage here?
I think it is Pakistan that's isolated. As to their relationships with China and Turkey, of course, it is for those two countries to decide. All I can say to them is caveat emptor, let the buyer beware.
OK. Vikram Doraisamy, India's High Commissioner to the UK. Your Excellency, thank you so much for making the time for us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, let's speak to our correspondent in Pakistan now, Azadeh Mashiri. Azadeh, good afternoon. What do you have to make of the High Commissioner's remarks?
Well, I think it highlights one of the most crucial stumbling blocks about this current conflict, and it's the claims and counterclaims, and also the disagreement about how this even started, because the Pakistani government, as well as the military, firmly deny that they had anything to do with the events in Pahalgam last month, the attack on 26 people, mostly tourists, who were killed in Indian-administered Kashmir. What India has said is that militants responsible for this attack are based in Pakistan. Again, that's something that Pakistan denies. And as you heard there from the Indian High Commissioner, Pakistan is accused of harboring terrorists, and this is something that Pakistan has dealt with in the last few decades. At one point in 2018, it was placed on the FATF grey list. You're placed on that if there's a concern about any sort of state sponsorship or any lack of prevention for militant financing, or in their words, terrorist financing. They were placed on that list because of groups like Lashkar Taiba and JEM, which have sponsored attacks in Indian-administered Kashmir. But one thing that officials will keep pointing at is when they were removed from that list in 2020. Still, those accusations are there, and the US State Department, as well as the United Nations, still believes there is the presence of these groups here in Pakistan, that financing is still possible. But again, that is something that Pakistan firmly denies. Now, when you're talking about this current conflict and what Pakistan and India both describe as a response, they're both claiming that they're targeting civilian infrastructure. Pakistan firmly denies that it has targeted any civilian infrastructure on Indian territory. It says that it is targeting military bases. And if we talk about what's going on right now, Operation Bunyan Marzus, which means the Iron Wall, they say that this is in response to 3 of their military sites having been targeted by India. Now, the biggest question here is, of course, how does this end? Can this be de-escalated? And speaking to people in Pakistan today, that is something that several residents keep saying. They keep saying, I don't see an off-ramp. I don't see how this will end. And that's why world leaders have been appealing to both countries to show maximum restraint, and why they're both now talking, they're urging both these countries to start speaking to each other. The US has offered to start productive and constructive talks between the two, as they've put it. But of course, as all these claims and counterclaims continue, these tensions are still rising. And right now there is that big question of whether this current conflict, how this current conflict can end, and whether it will escalate, which of course is particularly concerning for everyone here in South Asia.
OK, Azadeh Mashiri for us in Islamabad. Azadeh, as always, thank you. Now, the leaders of Britain, France, Germany and Poland have called on Russia to agree to an unconditional 30-day ceasefire in its war in Ukraine. The 4 European leaders, including Sir Keir Starmer and President Macron, are in Kiev for talks with President Zelensky. They're vowing to continue putting pressure on Russia and build on a proposal put forward by President Trump, which President Putin has so far not agreed to. This visit is the first joint visit to Ukraine by these nations since Moscow's invasion more than 3 years ago. Our chief political correspondent Henry Zeffman is travelling with Sir Keir Starmer and sent this report.
This is a visit full of symbolism. Yesterday in Moscow, Vladimir Putin was joined by 20 or so world leaders supportive of Russia. Here is President Zelensky's answer, joined not just by Sir Keir Starmer, but by President Macron of France, the new German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. But there is more than just symbolism to this. The sign behind me, the coalition of the willing, that idea that Sir Keir Starmer has been trying to get off the ground for months now, they will be holding a virtual call. So not just the leaders here today, but also joined by the rest of the 30 or so group of mostly European nations who want to find a way to commit to support Ukraine if a peace deal with Russia can be achieved. Now, what of the prospects for that peace? Well, talking to senior UK government sources, there is a sense that there's just a glimmer of hope that President Trump's position might be hardening towards Russia, that he's growing truly frustrated with President Putin and his approach, that this 30-day ceasefire, which the leaders called for overnight as they arrived here in Ukraine, might actually be a goer. Is that just another false hope, or might it be a practical reality? That's a question that could begin to be answered here today.
Well, also in Kiev is our security correspondent Frank Gardner. He explained the significance of these talks.
Well, I think you've got to separate the symbolism from the fact and the reality. It is very symbolic that a day after Moscow held its big victory parade through Red Square, President Putin showing the world that he's not as isolated as the West would like him to be. He's got the leader of one of the most powerful economies in the world, Xi Jinping, sitting beside him, standing beside him. Meanwhile, over here today, you've got the leaders of 4 major European countries meeting, shoring up support for Ukraine, making pledges of support, laying wreaths, lighting candles. But what really matters is what President Trump is going to do, because Ukrainians take the view, look, this is great. They appreciate the support. They know that they're going to have to depend more on Europe in the future. But the one thing that's really going to make a difference is if President Trump decides that he has lost patience with Vladimir Putin, that, as he puts it in one of his posts on Truth Social, that he is simply tapping him along, i.e. stringing him along, and follows through on his threat with secondary sanctions. That would mean sanctioning those countries that buy Russia's oil, China, India, and others. At the same time, I think it's quite likely that President Zelensky will repeat his request for more long-range weaponry, things like Germany's Taurus missiles system, or long-range artillery system, which it's a rocket system actually, which Friedrich Merz's predecessor, Olaf Scholz, was nervous about supplying. He didn't want to antagonize President Putin. But Friedrich Merz, the new Chancellor of Germany, is much more forward-leaning when it comes to supplying Ukraine with weaponry, and I think it's quite likely that we will see a change in Germany's stance there.
Well, let's speak to former Defence Minister for Ukraine, Andriy Zagoroduniuk. Mr. Zagoroduniuk, thank you very much for joining us. What will President Zelensky be demanding from these European leaders today?
I think, frankly speaking, saying demanding is no longer applicable, because we have a unanimous and extremely strong support from European leaders right now. And it is based on the understanding that Ukraine is essentially a huge part of European security, and Ukraine is willingly does whatever it needs to be done in order to secure peace, if it's just possible, even theoretically. Clearly, Russia is still progressing with the escalation, with continuing the war. And so right now, the idea is not about like convincing anyone anymore. Right now, the idea is like how to find a theory of stability of some kind, and how to basically secure Ukraine's position in this situation, and then how to convince US that they shouldn't look in Ukraine the roots of this instability, but actually they should finally start pressuring Russia.
If I may, how is that achieved? Because there's been lots of talk about the coalition of the willing, lots of vocal support for Ukraine, but is that translating into action on the battlefield?
Well, first of all, the battlefield is it's strangely, basically, it's as stabilized by Ukraine as it possible. A key element of this stabilization, relative, because it's still, of course, it's extremely volatile, and there's a lot of actions, but it doesn't move strategically for months now, actually for over a year. But the thing is that this is achieved through the European support of Ukrainian industry. So Europe has invested a lot of funds and a lot of efforts in order to support Ukrainian defense industry. Ukraine built its own weapons, built particularly unmanned systems, which are currently breaking any offensive plans of Russia. So right now we can see that despite of the shortage of people, despite of the shortage of some weapon systems, Ukraine is still being able to relatively stabilize the front. And right now there's a lot of discussions about accelerating this support and building more systems, particularly unmanned systems, in order to hold the line further and secure it.
There's this push for a 30-day ceasefire. Is that likely?
Frankly speaking, I don't think so. We don't see any single indication from Russia that they're actually really thinking about any de-escalation at all. And that's very sad. But that's the reality, particularly with yesterday's claims at the parade. They were not like leaning towards peace. They were leaning towards the, breaking the world order, whatever is left of it, and essentially claiming that there was a famous statement from joint China and Russia about the actually provocations from the Western side. So it doesn't look like that they're planning to de-escalate at all.
Okay. Andriy Zagoroduniuk, former Defence Minister for Ukraine, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here in the UK, police are investigating an attack on a prison officer at Belmarsh Prison, which is reported to have been carried out by Axel Rudakabana, the Southport killer, the 18-year-old who was jailed for a minimum of 52 years for the murder of 3 young girls in an attack at a dance class last summer. Our correspondent Tom Simons has this report.
Axel Rudakabana is reported to have thrown boiling water at a prison officer at Belmarsh High Security Prison. Now, kettles are allowed in many prisons, though there are supposed to be risk assessments. The prison officer was taken to hospital as a precaution. He has been released and is expected back at work next week. But the Ministry of Justice here has made a statement. It said that police are investigating an attack on a prison officer at HMP Belmarsh yesterday. The MOJ goes on, violence in prison will not be tolerated, and we will always push for the strongest possible punishment for attacks on our hard-working staff. Now, I think it's fair to say that the government has a bit of a headache with these very high-profile and quite dangerous prisoners, often in segregation areas of high-security prisons. Let's take Hashim Abedi, the Manchester bomber who in 2020 at Belmarsh with 2 other men attacked a prison officer and was convicted of that attack in court. Now, he had to be moved from Belmarsh to Frankland Open Prison, where in April, so last month, he attacked 3 prison officers with hot oil and homemade weapons. And there's still a police investigation going on into that attack. He's been moved back to Belmarsh, where this attack happened on Thursday. And so the Prison Officers Association, which represents rank and file prison officers, is concerned about the possibility of copycat incidents between some of these high-risk prisoners. The head of the POA, Mark Fairhurst, said we should concentrate on control and containment instead of attempting to appease them. And that was in response to the attack by Hashim Abedi in April. Now, Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, has asked for a number of different reviews of security in prisons with all this going on. In particular, she's asked for a fast review of whether prison officers should have body armour. And she has said that there are further questions to answer and more that must be done to protect prison officers in our prisons.
Tom Simons there. Now, the mayor of New York in the state of New Jersey, Ras Baraka, has been arrested and taken away in handcuffs from an immigration detention centre. The state prosecutor in New Jersey said Mr. Baraka had trespassed and ignored multiple warnings to leave. The mayor is running for the Democratic nomination for New Jersey governor. The primary is due next month. Our North America correspondent Jake Kwon sent this report.
This is the latest clash between the Trump administration and the local officials in the matter of immigration. Earlier, Mr. Baraka, who is the mayor of New York, the largest city in New Jersey, was arrested outside the prison, which opened just a week ago to meet the demand of rising number of arrest and deportation of the migrants in the U.S. He was accused of trespassing and trying to enter the prison to protest the mass deportation policy. Now, the mayor, he was released the same day. He said that it was not his intention to protest the deportations, that he did not enter the prison, he did not trespass, that he was there simply because the prison had refused to allow a fire inspection and to obtain the building permit, and thus violated the local laws. Now, even though this is the latest arrest of a local official, it is likely not the last one. Mr. Trump has been taking a very heavy-handed approach to these local officials. He sees them as resisting his popular mandate that he was elected to enact these anti-immigration policy. And even today, while his polling number are slipping, like in the area of economy, the immigration is one area he still remains somewhat popular. So this policy will likely continue.
Now, part of a Soviet spacecraft is expected to crash back down to Earth today, but experts don't know exactly where it will land. Cosmos was launched in 1972, heading for Venus, but it failed to escape orbit. Our science correspondent Palab Ghosh has the story.
Cosmos 482, similar to this spacecraft, failed to escape low Earth orbit and broke into 4 pieces shortly after launch. And it's only now that one of these fragments, most probably the lander, will re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. Spacecraft do this almost on a daily basis and usually burn up on re-entry. But the Soviet-built probe was designed to survive the descent into Venus's harsh acidic atmosphere, so there's a chance that some of it could remain intact and land on Earth.
it was designed to survive re-entry, so we can be pretty sure that there's going to be at least one fragment surviving of it. And because of its peculiar orbit in which it is, and because it's a nice intact object, it's also an opportunity for scientists to study the behavior and the re-entry of this kind of objects.
This means it could potentially land anywhere from as far north as London to as far south as the southern tip of South America. But the chances of it impacting on a populated area are tiny. 70% of the Earth is covered by sea, and most of the landmass is sparsely populated. Palab Ghosh, BBC News.
So maybe wear a bike helmet when you go out for a walk today. Now, before we go this half hour, let's remind you of our top story. And Pakistan says it's retaliating after accusing India of striking 3 Pakistani air bases overnight, including one close to the capital, Islamabad. Both countries blame each other for the violence, which has flared up since militants killed Indian tourists last month in Indian-administered Kashmir. India accuses Pakistan of being involved, an accusation Pakistan denies. Will continue to follow this story here on BBC News.